From the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., Cole on Congress. The program discussing national issues that affect Oklahoma. Your host, U.S. Representative Tom Cole.
Thank you for joining me today for another episode of Cole on Congress. Today I'm pleased to welcome Congressman Randy Neugebauer to the program. Since 2003, Randy's represented the 19th District of the great state of Texas. That includes Lubbock and Abilene. He chairs the Oversight and Investigations Panel on the House Financial Services Committee and also serves on the Agriculture Committee and the Science Committee as well. So, Randy, great to have you here.
Tom, thanks for having me on the program. I was thinking this morning, when I decided to run for Congress in that special election, I came to Washington, D.C., and you were one of the first members of Congress that I visited with.
Well, we had an old friend, Scotty Howe, who did your media, and he actually had called and said, there's this guy, he's going to win this race. Yeah. And you did. And that was really a remarkable campaign, special election. I had literally just gotten here a matter of months, so we're in the same class. And then after that, you had a really tough redistricting process out there with Charlie Stenholm. That was one of the great clashes of that election cycle in 2004, and you blew him away, and it's a pretty impressive career.
Well, we've enjoyed serving with you.
Now, I have to tell our viewers and our listeners that we agreed that we would not talk about the Texas Tech OU game as long as I didn't bring up the OSU Texas Tech game.
Exactly.
But Randy is a very proud Red Raider, and we're used to losing to you out there, but we're sure not used to you coming into our house and beating us. But he's just a class guy, and we get to talk a lot of football, but the thing that has impressed me so much, I mean, you have a wonderful background for your background as a businessman, as a banker, your background in development and real estate, but you're just core commitment to conservative values. Just so our listeners know, Randy's routinely one of the most conservative members of Congress in what's really a pretty conservative conference, but he does it in such a thoughtful way. He's one of the guys that can get up and literally move the conference by reminding us some of the reasons why we're here, some of the fundamental commitments we made to the American people. And you really have made a difference around this place in terms of, I think, reconnecting the Republican Party to what it was supposed to be, and frankly, probably what it wasn't a few years ago. It's moved broadly in the right direction. It's become a little bit more principled and courageous. We could have, as freshmen, when you and I were here, I don't think we could have ever pass something like the Ryan budget, for instance.
Exactly.
And the fact that we did, or ever had unanimity against the Obama health care plan, those kinds of things. You have a lot to do with that.
Well, thank you, Tommy. Those are just principles that I firmly believe in, and I came up here to hopefully make a difference for our country, but more importantly, make a difference for the future of our country. One of the things that's in my office for people to come by, I have a wagon, and there's a little red radio wagon, and there's a little placard in there, and it says, are you riding or are you pulling a wagon? And, one of the principles I believe this country was founded on was people came to America because they felt like that there was opportunity here, that if you hooked onto your wagon and you pulled it, you had the opportunity to succeed and enjoy the fruits of your efforts. Over the years, I'm afraid we've kind of moved in a direction where we've got some people riding in the wagon, and we're getting more and more people riding in the wagon, and unfortunately fewer and fewer people pulling the wagon. So I'm hopeful to stay up here and work with great colleagues like yourself, and we'll work together to make sure that the next generation gets an opportunity to hook onto their own wagon and enjoy the fruits of their efforts.
Well, I'm going to ask you to reflect a little bit about where we are right now in that very process. We're in the last days of a very contentious year, first year of a new Republican House majority. Frankly, as I was telling a group of students just a few minutes ago, as an old historian, I can't remember, we haven't had Congress divided one chamber, one party, and one the other since the 1980s. And we've not had a Republican House versus a Democratic Senate and a Democratic President at least since the Truman era. I mean, this is a very unusual set of circumstances, frankly, much more complex than when we were in the majority or the minority in terms of how you put all the rubrics cubed together, and can you actually make progress on those things that you talked about. So think back over the year and give me the pluses and the minuses from your standpoint. If you want to do a little prognosticating about where we're going to end up, that's fine too.
Well, we started off the year, beginning what would be the third year of a deficit over, $1 trillion. And what we all know is that that's not sustainable. We're in a direction right now that for every dollar that the government's spending, we're borrowing 42 cents. And we've seen an acceleration in debt since we got here. And I believe, Tom, quite honestly, one of the greatest threats to our country today is really our deficits and we getting control of those, because that really impacts that future that I was talking about earlier. But we did pass a very bold budget, and that was the Ryan Plan. It was controversial because really it laid out a roadmap where we were all going to have to tighten our belts.
And not to interrupt you, but on that, I actually think the members of this conference, particularly the freshmen who joined us and turned us in, deserve enormous amounts of credit, because they passed that knowing it was going to be controversial, knowing they we couldn't get it through the Senate, and certainly the president would never work with that, but laying out a real statement of principles that they knew they were going to pay a political price for at the time and in the campaigns in 2012. And that kind of political courage is actually what I think we didn't have when we were in the majority before in sufficient numbers. And I always say, you can say whatever you want about this particular conference, and its history is yet to be written, but it's a courageous conference. It is a conference willing to stand and fight on principle. It is,
and you're exactly right. I think the folks, when I interviewed a lot of those candidates when they were thinking about running for Congress in 2010, and I told them that the situation we were in, that you could literally be a one-term Congress trying to balance the federal budget. Because you're going to have to make some votes that are going to be tough votes. And it was very encouraging, I think, for me, and I'm sure it was for you as well, to see that, them take those votes early in their career. I mean, this was members that many of those took that vote 90 days into their congressional career. And so, but that's the kind of statesmen and stateswomen that we need if we're going to, really change the direction of our country. And so it is, and we've seen our conference get much more conservative. In the last election, we saw a lot of the moderate Democrats, quite honestly, lose to our more conservative Republicans.
Yeah, and even conservative Democrats, because I think you're now being held to account for what your party leadership does. It's pretty hard these days to go home and say, well, I voted differently on this issue and that issue, but if you were with George Bush, or if you were with President Obama, or you were with Nancy Pelosi, or I'm sorry, you're still sort of responsible for what that crowd's doing. And I actually think that's a good thing. I mean, I think it's much more difficult to insulate yourself by saying, well, I'm only sort of up there traveling along. I'm not really voting with them, but we all know on the floor every key rules vote. When they need to vote, those folks tend to be there. And you just need to pick the team that you believe in broadly and be where that team's at as consistently as you possibly can.
That's right, and so so we started with the budget process, and then obviously we had other votes, increasing the debt ceiling, putting things in place to see if we could move in that direction. We've got these appropriation bills in the House, passed I think 9 or 10 of the appropriation bills, and in regular order we went through the committee process, and there was the bumps and grinds of doing that. Unfortunately, our colleagues over in the Senate didn't follow suit, and so we've done one minibus, and as you point out, we got some work to do this way to finish up that. We're still waiting to see if we'll be able to pass a combined bill. I
know we're sort of getting on, but the interesting thing to me about that, where we're at right now, just so our listeners know, this is the most bizarre thing. We're sitting here on a Wednesday. We could be done with all the appropriations bills for next year by Friday, because both sides fundamentally agree.
Exactly.
We've all the negotiations done, and we would like to have spent less. They would like to spend more. We split the difference. We're there. The President of the United States and the Senate Majority Leader are effectively threatening to shut down the government on Friday if they don't get their way on the payroll tax and some of these other things at the year end. Now, that is remarkable to me. That's something Republicans get accused of all the time. But literally, we have the Senate Majority Leader and the President saying, we don't get our way on this, we're not signing the appropriations bills that would keep government running all next year, even though we agree and even though the two sides have negotiated an agreement. I've never seen anything like it.
I know it. And, I think what's frustrating for me about that, Tom, is we should have already had these appropriation bills passed a long time ago. And then we have the president come in here at the very last minute and weigh in on this issue when we really could have used his leadership all throughout the year. And, one of the things that we've said to the president is, where is your plan on a lot of these issues? And that's one of his responsibilities. And I think the Republican Party, particularly in the House, is to be commended because we actually brought out real plans for people to look at, and it was transparent, and here's our cards, but we asked, the President and the Senate Majority Leader, please show us your plan. Let's bring our ideas together.
Well, that's one of the interesting things. Most people don't realize when we showed up here, there was no budget for this year, which is unprecedented. The Congress, the House at least, always writes and finishes a budget. So we had to write the budget for this year and then turn to next year. We passed, obviously, our budget. The Senate, in 1,000 days, hasn't written a budget, almost 3 years
remarkable,
now.
Isn't it?
It is amazing.
Yeah.
And the president's initial budget, honestly, was so frivolous it got sent to the Senate, failed 97-0. I mean, that's where his own party controls. They wouldn't vote for it. So, I think actually we've been, by laying our cards on the table, as you say, this is what we would prefer to do. This is the way we want to go, but we recognize we have to negotiate. We don't control the Senate and the House, or the presidency. Have tried, but I actually think the other side in this has been less than forthright about laying out a position, advocating it, and then finding middle ground.
It is, and I think the American people lose when those kinds of games are played. I mean, what government really does its best work, and I commend Speaker Boehner. He's laid out this year where, we're going to do things in the committee process in regular order, as we say. We made an effort to do that. Previously, under Nancy Pelosi, we didn't have that. In many cases, bills were just brought to the floor and
no chance to
amend them or to offer amendment. And we have a lot of smart people here on both sides of the aisle, and the country would benefit, when everybody comes to the table.
I couldn't agree more. Well, you want to hazard a guess on how all this ends up, at the end of the day?
Well, it's tough right now, to see how strong of a hand that Mr. Reid wants to play if he doesn't, take up any of these bills and just kind of sits on it. Then, we're going to come up to Friday, and our options are either to pass for the Senate to take up that version, or which would the other option, which I don't like, and I know you don't, and that's what we call a CR, where we just kind of bump everything forward. I don't think that's a good outcome, but I think it's a potential outcome.
Yeah, I think at least until we get these bigger issues settled and compromised, I think you're probably right. But it's a tricky and difficult time. Well, let me, I could talk the big philosophical issues forever because we agree. But obviously you have the normal life in the House as well. And I wanted you to talk a little bit about your position in Oversight Investigation Subcommittee of Financial Services, because you're right at the center of some of the really important debates over how this country's financial service sector is going to operate. What lessons did we learn from 2008? What should we be doing going forward? So give us an update on what you're doing legislatively.
Well, Tom, thank you for that question. We've been doing a lot, is because there's a lot of things to be working on. We've been working on, for example, Freddie and Fannie. One, trying to get the taxpayers off the hook for the responsibility that taxpayers have over $150 billion investment in those two entities. We're trying to work on things that will get the private market back in place, where we can not let the federal government dominate all of the mortgage markets. We've been looking at HUD and some of the programs there. What we found was there was some waste, fraud, and abuse going on.
I know that's going to be a shock to your constituents and mine.
Yes. And so we're trying to get those agencies. We've also, this Dodd-Frank bill, this piece of legislation that was passed, a very broad net thrown over the entire financial markets. What we're concerned about is that how does that affect your and my constituents back home? Well, how it affects them is that the cost of capital and the borrowing for cars and houses and for businesses, if you raise the cost of financing, it increases the cost for them.
If I can, let me ask you a question about that, because I remember I serve on the WHIP team, and obviously we were lining up votes, this is really a couple of years ago, to vote against Dodd-Frank, and our leadership was a little concerned we'd look like we were on the side of Wall Street. I made the comment in WHIP meeting, I said, I don't think that's true. All I can tell you is every banker, every credit union, every person I know that is focused on the financial sector in my district hates this bill. They all tell me it's going to really be a disaster. It's going to make it more difficult to lend. It's going to make it harder for small businesses to get credit. It's going to complicate their operations. That's pretty easy for me to vote no when everybody I know, it'd be like if every farmer came to me and told me the farm bill is terrible, or every energy guy came to me and told me that in oil and gas this is going to shut us down. So it's a pretty easy vote, and yet at the same time, when you oppose it, you're like put in league with. I had a lot of the Wall Street people saying, well, yeah, we don't like it all, but we can live with it. I mean, what went wrong that we seem to be punishing people that had no responsibility, community bankers and credit unions for 2008, and folks that had more culpability on Wall Street, so to speak, seemed to get off a little bit lighter.
Yeah, I think what happened, Tom, is we didn't do the work correctly. The Democrats were eager to jump out and start trying to find out a way to kind of punish Wall Street, but what the problem is the financial markets are everybody, and so you got Wall Street and Main Street. And so, instead of having an autopsy of where things went wrong and then going in and fixing those areas if you found that there was not proper regulation, what we've found so far in our investigations is that in many cases it wasn't that we didn't have the right regulations in place, we had regulators actually not doing their job. And so putting more regulations in place doesn't make the regulators better. So one of the things of some of our hearings has actually been bringing these regulators in and pointing out where there was telltale signs. Bernie Madoff, for example. I mean, early on, people were saying there's a problem here, but yet the regulators weren't doing their job. And so you can't regulate behavior. And so when people aren't behaving in the business side and the regulatory side, all of the regulations in the world won't fix that. But so we've been working on that and trying to sort through that and make sure that we don't impact those folks that rely on the financial services industry to provide so many services to them. And a lot of your community banks are concerned because now you've got the government telling their customers how many overdrafts they can have, telling them that whether kinds of mortgages they're going to be able to have, and being very prescriptive. And again, a big overreach by the federal government and not letting our community bankers and the people that are in the credit unions tailor financial products for their individual customers. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think how you sort that all out, particularly in a highly partisan atmosphere, as you mentioned, Fannie and Freddie, and they are financial entities, but they also historically have been political honeypots up here, largely for Democrats, but for others as well, to be fair. Where you can hold very lucrative positions. We give you a favored financial position as a government, a quasi guarantee, so you can undercut everybody else. And they really need to go away. I mean, we really need to do something where you really have smaller but private institutions handling much smaller segments of the market than they used to dominate.
And we can't do that until we get the private market. But one of the problems right now is because Freddie and Fannie and FHA basically have over 90% of the business going on right now. And so they're competing unfairly because they have the taxpayers' backing. And so their cost ratio is different than the private sectors. And so what we've got to do is make these entities charge market rates for the products that they're providing so that the private sector can have an opportunity. So we bring the private sector in and begin to then shrink the Freddie and Fannie and FHA and causing the least amount of disruption to the housing market. market as we can. And obviously the housing market's taking it on the chin. And quite honestly, Tom, I think it's going to take a while for that to work itself through. We just got so much inventory out there. We built too many houses. People, unfortunately, were allowed to buy homes that probably should have been renting, and renting's certainly okay. There's a point in time where you rent or you own, depending on what your situation is. But it's going to take a while to fix all that.
Now, just to show what a Renaissance man you are, I'm going to move you from high finance to farming, because I know you've done some really important work on crop insurance, and your district, as I recall, has an awful lot of cotton, a lot of agriculture, obviously, just given the size and location, just as mine does. There is an important federal component there, but I'd like to get your view on where we're headed in crop insurance and what you think's ahead for our farmers in our part of the world.
Yeah, well, our farm bill expires next year, and so we're going to be looking at the entire, production agriculture part of the farm bill, as well as in the food stamps and other parts of it. So one of the things that I think we're going to see is a change in that safety net. And so one of the things I've been working on since I've been in Congress is improving the crop insurance program. We're giving producers the flexibility, because many of them plant multiple crops, some of it dryland, some irrigated, some grain, some cotton, some peanuts. So what we want to do is provide an adequate risk management tool for those producers, because as you know, in your district and my district, now agriculture is a big business. The farmers, in order to be competitive, have to farm large pieces of land, and so they need good risk management tools. And so as we look at the final days of the Farm Bill, I think crop insurance is going to be an important part of that as we try to rebuild the proper farm policy for our country, because it's very important.
Well, I wouldn't be a hometown guy if I didn't give you a chance to tell me what a great job Frank Lucas is doing as chairman of the Ag Committee.
Absolutely, and joy to serve under Frank, and he works really hard in his job as chairman. He's got a tough job. He was working with a super committee trying to craft something in case that farm policy was going to be changed, and now he's ramping up, to write a new farm bill in 2012, and that's probably one of the most difficult assignments that a ag chairman can have, and Frank Lucas is certainly up to that task, and I look forward to kind of rolling up my sleeves with him and working on that.
I don't know how I did it. I'm sure you follow this as a member of the Ag Committee more closely than I did, but one of the things that impressed me the most is during those super committee negotiations, they're looking for savings. Somehow he and Debbie Stabenow, who's his counterpart in the United States Senate, Democrat from Michigan, put together a proposal to save $23 billion worth of expenditures over the next decade, which I thought, it's very seldom you see chairmen coming forward and tell something about the good work of your committee, saying, here's some areas we can save some money.
Absolutely. And I think it was great leadership, and he worked in a bipartisan way. I think one of the things about the House Ag Committee, it's generally a pretty bipartisan committee. We try to keep our politics to agriculture, and what's good for American agriculture is good for American families as well. But Frank took that initiative to do that because he felt like that he could leave it up to the super committee, where there wasn't a lot of people on the super committee that had an agricultural background, and so he took it upon himself to work and craft some things to help that committee accomplish their goal, but also to make sure that we were putting together good principles for farm policy.
Well, again, to switch, I'm kind of throwing things at you rapid fire here, but frankly, you're involved in such a range of things. It's good for our viewers and listeners to hear about it. I know you just came back from Afghanistan, and we get pretty focused here at home, but you've always been a really strong defender of the American military and the appropriate role for the United States around the world, and obviously that's a difficult place. We've got 45th Infantry Brigade from Oklahoma over there right now. They've actually had over 20 deaths. It's been very difficult and challenging to where they're in a very tough place right along the Pakistani border, where there's a lot of infiltration from the Haqqani network into Afghanistan. So I'm very interested in what what kind of impressions you have from just coming back from the theater, so to speak.
Well, I wasn't. I was with another great Oklahoman, and that's Senator Inhofe, and we went over.
I know you worked then.
and we ran into some of the folks from serving our nation from Oklahoma and as well as Texas, and it's always an honor and privilege to be around those folks. It's always humbling for me to see their dedication and the professionalism and their commitment. Tom, we have to remind everybody this is an all-volunteer force, so every one of those men and women that were over there, volunteered to do that. Afghanistan is very complex, and you really can't talk about Afghanistan and Pakistan in separate conversations. They're really very connected, and so which makes it obviously a much more complex issue. Much different than Iraq. I've been to Iraq. I know you've been to Iraq as well. Two different countries, different issues. Afghanistan people, are very low education level. They don't have the natural resources, that say an Iraq has, or the educational level, and so it's a struggle over there. But the ultimate goal, as it was in Iraq and it is for Afghanistan, is one for the will of the people of Afghanistan to be fulfilled if they want to be a free people. Also teaching them how to defend that freedom, and there is no freedom, if you're not, if you can't defend that freedom. And so we're trying to do that. Obviously, a lot of opinions on how we accomplish that goal, and the president wants to draw those folks down. Any drawdown, I think you have to be careful to make sure that you're drawing down, if that's the plan, at a level where you don't give up a lot of ground. And one of the concerns I have about announcing troop levels is that's almost like a quarterback telling the defense, I'm about to run this play, but don't cover me.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to be careful there. But our outcomes are different for Afghanistan and Iraq, and we'll see if the Afghani people can stand up a government, sustain it, and also sustain their security.
We've got a couple minutes left, and the time we have left, again, one of the great things about you when you get up and talk in conference, and I always tell people, you can see the debates on the floor, but we almost always know what the outcome on the floor is going to be. And so the debate it's theater, but it's predictable. The debates in conference you don't necessarily know, and some of the most important debates are ones in a conference when either the Democrats on their side or Republicans kind of decide collectively what they want to do. What you think broadly about our conference and what we ought to be about. If you were looking forward, Randy, what should we really be focused on the next 2 or 3 years? Not just as Republicans or conservatives, but really as Americans. What do you see the big problems and where this party ought to go, or this conference ought to go to try and solve those problems?
Yeah, I think that the deficit thing, Tom, is probably the number one thing that we can do, because this is not a sustainable level. We only have to look across the pond to what's going on in Europe right now, to countries that continue to borrow and spend, and not begin to recognize that that's not sustainable. And so we have a little bit of a head start here, but not much of one, because our debt to GDP is almost 100%, and many of those countries are in the same range. And so I think what we have to do is, the number one goal we can do is to educate the American people that this is an issue that we're going to have to address, and have an open and honest debate with them and discussion. Educate them, because American people are plenty smart. They're already making some of those same adjustments in their own lives. They're tightening their belts. The businesses are doing the same thing, and there's no reason the government can't do that. But we're going to have to tell them the truth, and then make sure that when we articulate what our policies are, our reasons, but more importantly, paint the outcome so that they can realize that we're working towards a goal and we're not just scattergun shooting ideas out there.
Well, one of these times I'd like to get you back here actually to talk about that, because I think when you talk about your granddaughter and you talk about the future, and the passion comes through, and these are not isolated issues. They really are linked. I want to thank you. I want to thank you for the wonderful service. Thanks, obviously, for coming on the show, but I really look forward to serving with you, Randy. You're one of the guys that get things done around here and actually stands up for things, so thanks for all you do.
Tom, thank you. Enjoyed it. Thanks for having me on the program.
My pleasure.